Before we get into the video, I'd like to take a moment to pay tribute to the late Akira Toriyama, who sadly passed away on March 1st. Toriyama was a legend of the manga and anime industry, paving the way for what it is today and provided inspiration to millions through his work. And for the impact he's left on me personally and all the memories I cherish of the worlds and characters he created, all I can say is thank you, and rest in peace, Akira Toriyama. The world of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is vast and expansive, with the manga clocking in at over 25,000 pages across its 9 parts, which is even longer than One Piece, believe it or not. And on top of that, there is also the extended world of JoJo, which is home to tons of other stories and spin-offs that take place in between the manga's original or canon story arcs. But many of these additional works are endorsed by Araki, often providing original illustrations and feedback to their creators, which make them feel right at home in the world of JoJo. Although today, we'll be taking a look at one of these stories which, after a troubled development, never saw the light of day, leaving behind only a 31-page draft and a handful of illustrations by Araki, only to wind up cancelled and discarded after years of work. So the curious story behind this work begins with its author Otsuichi, a Japanese novelist, film director, and longtime fan of Araki's work. The year was 2001 when Otsuichi was visiting Shueisha's editorial department, assumingly for reasons completely unrelated to JoJo. Although when at the office, he learned about the upcoming Part 5 novel that would soon be published, this being JoJo's Bizarre Adventure 2 Golden Heart, Golden Rain, and Otsuichi couldn't help but notice that they skipped from Part 3 to Part 5, as back in 1993 released the first JoJo light novel based on Stardust Crusaders. So, Otsuichi asked, why aren't you doing a novel for JoJo Part 4, and even offered to write it himself if no one at their office could do it. This request was soon accepted and he began writing. Then just a year later, in December 2002, a 31-page draft of the novel was published in Yomu Jump, titled JoJo's Bizarre Adventure: The Anatomy Lesson of Dr. Nicolaes Tulp, with a cover and illustrations by Araki promising a full release just a few months later in February 2003, followed by a photo op of Otsuichi and Araki promoting the tag team nature of the work. Although come 2003, the novel does not release, and Otsuichi discards a 400-page manuscript based on the original draft, after not being satisfied with his writing, and in the following years would give frequent updates on his progress and the difficulties he faced. In the same 2002 magazine as the draft, he said, "The final version isn't ready yet. It's an endless cycle where I keep writing and then discarding it myself. I'm sorry, Araki-sensei. I'm honored that you took the time out of your busy schedule to draw illustrations. I hope it turns out to be a good story." Then 2 years later, in 2004, says, "Although I've completed it many times, I'm never quite satisfied with it, so I end up discarding it myself. In the end, I've thrown out over 2,000 pages of manuscript. I'm torn between the feeling that it's better to postpone it than to publish something subpar, and the urge to publish within a time frame even if it's not perfect. Should I compromise and move on to the next task? Now that I have a stable income, I want to spend time satisfying myself rather than tackling many jobs one after the other." And after this change in mindset, 3 years would pass, and in 2007, Otsuichi finally completes this novel, now retitled to The Book, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Fourth Another Day, which released to great praise from fans and Araki himself, who had said in an interview following its release that all of the hard work really paid off and that it's an incredible book with a rich ending. So in the end, it all seemed to work out. Otsuichi released a novel he was satisfied with and was enjoyed by readers. Although what's left behind from this long journey are the remnants of his original story, The Anatomy Lesson of Dr. Nicolaes Tulp, which features a completely different plot with characters and stands not in the final book. So out of curiosity, let's take a look at that original draft and the context behind Araki's illustrations and maybe try to find out what went wrong. And shout out to the team over at JoJo's Bizarre Encyclopedia, who recently provided a full summarization of this original draft along with Araki's illustrations. So since this was released in 2002, it was during the serialization of Stone Ocean. So on the colored cover by Araki, we have this unique illustration of Josuke in Araki's Part 6 style, and nearing the bottom of the page is the protagonist Kaoru. So the story takes place 1 year after Part 4 and opens with a prologue of a mysterious unnamed character on a bus headed to Morio, and making conversation with a passenger says they're on a business trip and express interest in Morio's mysterious nature, like the town's abnormally high number of missing people people and goes on to tell previous stories from their work travels, like high-speed flying creatures that can only be seen on camera, which is a reference to the rods controlled by Rakeel Stant Sky High in part 6, and a resurrected death row inmate, which is referring to Angelo's failed execution from part 4. And the last story they recount goes into more detail about an art thief who stole from a museum in a seemingly impossible way, like the art just disappeared with no signs of break-in, although shortly after, an officer caught the thief on the premises, and despite shooting him in the chest and forehead, he was completely fine, pulling out his own gun, killing multiple guards, and getting away. So it would seem this unknown character telling the story travels the world investigating potential supernatural occurrences, maybe a member of the Speedwagon Foundation, that's kind of their bread and butter, but whatever their motive, they arrive in Morio presumably for reasons related to the art thief, as unlike the previous stories they mentioned, that one is not a reference to something that has already happened in JoJo. And the title of the story is The Anatomy Lesson of Dr. Nicolaes Tulp, which is a reference to a famous 1632 painting of the same name, so you could imagine this art thief might be important to the story. We then go into chapter 1, where we switch to the perspective of a 9-year-old boy Kaoru who just moved to Morio with his mother, settling in at the apartment previously occupied by the young couple who were killed by Kira in the later half of part 4, as this was the cheapest apartment they could find, as no one in town wanted to live there due to the rumors of the couple being killed inside. It's said that the boy and his mother move often and at the drop of a hat, as for some reason the mother is being stalked, followed from town to town due to something in her past. Kaoru also tells us about his stand and how he first noticed it when he was doing homework and accidentally stabbed himself with a pencil, but when he tried to pull it out, a force pulled the pencil under his skin and assimilated with his bones while still being visible, and it became a habit for Kaoru to constantly feel around his body for lumps and objects under his skin, which are caused by his stand. So the basic idea behind this stand is that the user can put things under their skin and even graft them to their bones to be used as a weapon, as the pencil almost looks like a blade arm, but it can also be used to store things. As we see later, Kaoru cuts open his own skin to pull out a coin, although he can't really seem to control what gets absorbed, as he just kind of finds things under his skin at random. Also, you'll notice Jolene's face on Kaoru's shirt for some reason, but that's just the design of the shirt, as Araki was probably just referencing his current work, which was Stone Ocean. So shortly after settling in Morio, Kaoru would meet Josuke Higashikata. This happens when Kaoru is walking through the shopping district and bumps into a man carrying a box. The box falls and something inside shatters. The man then erupts into an angry rant demanding compensation. Meanwhile, Josuke, walking nearby, notices this happen and picks up the box, asking the man to take a look inside before yelling at the kid, where he finds a vase perfectly fine inside. A classic Josuke and Crazy Diamond wholesome interaction. So the man, confused, thanks Josuke, but not before calling his hair funny, which of course causes an outrage as Josuke punches the man through a nearby window, and Kaoru sees Crazy Diamond, pointing it out to his mother, which surprises Josuke, but they leave shortly after. And as the days go on, Kaoru and Josuke would meet again and become friends, as Josuke saves him from the same group of delinquents in early part 4, running away in terror at the sight of Josuke. He then explains to Kaoru all about stands and the dark side to Morio, like a serial killer who used to live here and the souls of his victims who lurk behind in a ghost alley. And the final scene of this draft is Kaoru walking home, where he's stopped by a menacing old man on a park bench who at first asks some innocuous questions, but shortly divulges into insanity, with the man becoming more unhinged, saying Kaoru's father, who is presumed dead, is still alive, and that he'll find Kaoru no matter where he goes, and that his mother is hiding something. Kaoru, frightened by this, tries to leave, but the man strongly grabs his arm, and a nurse then pulls the old man away, taking him back to a nearby hospital. And as Kaoru walks away, he notices the imprint of the man's hand won't fade away. And like most unfinished and cancelled stories, we are left with a pretty anticlimactic send-off, as that's where the draft ends. And it's kind of a shame to think that this story was finished, a full 400 pages ultimately discarded, as there's a decent mystery setup here that I think fits within Morio. So even though this plot will forever be left a mystery, it's good to know that Otsuichi eventually ended up with a novel he was proud of. And in the afterword of the complete book, he even gave some insight into why this early draft just wasn't working, saying, "I wasn't using the characters of JoJo freely enough. In other words, it was as if the characters I were using were like puppets, which made them feel off. It made me realize that I needed to rethink my approach, and so I used these manuscripts as a way to refine my strategy for writing. I thought that I could only be able to do something like this once in my life, so if I put something in the book from the manuscripts that I wasn't satisfied with, I would regret it for the rest of my life. So I kept my head low and went 5 years without releasing anything." And that's the story of the cancelled JoJo novel You Can Never Read. But you should read Forth Another Day, which has been painstakingly and generously translated to English by Cool0210, one of the most dedicated members of the community, with his work on Part 8 and 9's translation, as well as even more in his free time. So definitely check it out if you're curious about what this story eventually became, and I should probably do a video on that someday. But for now, thank you all so much for watching. Please drop a like on the video if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel if you're not already, and I'll talk to you all real soon in a new video. Until then, I'm out. Peace.